We're now live, Chairman.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's virtual meeting of the Lincolnshire Schools Forum on the 5th of October 2023 at 1 o'clock. My name's Gavin Booth and I am the chairman of the forum. Before we begin, we've got some matters of procedure as usual to go through. So today's proceedings will be audio broadcasted and recorded. So for you to be aware of that. And then when invited to speak, can you make sure, please, that you unmute your microphone and turn on your camera? When you finish speaking, if you can keep your camera off and your microphone off, that should help with the connectivity. If during at any point during the debate you would like to ask a further question or raise a point, please put a message in the chat and we'll invite you to come in and speak. If you are for any reason having to leave the meeting, please can you indicate that in the chat as well? And if at any point we do lose connection, we just recommend that you kind of leave the meeting and then try and rejoin as soon as possible. If for any reason the kind of live broadcast goes down, we will kind of adjourn for a short time to allow the kind of technology to catch up, and then we will rejoin the meeting as quickly as we can. Right, so our first point of order is to kind of go through apologies. So over to you, Emily, please.
Thank you. We have apologies from Liam Mason, Amy Stancer, Heather Marks and Stephen Hopkins.
Fantastic. And do you want to go through the roll call to see who we've got with us today, please?
Yes, please. So if you could just confirm when your name's called whether you're present, please. Keena Adkins. Alan Howe.
Yes, I'm here. Thank you. Good afternoon, people.
Thank you. Tony Stevens.
Good afternoon.
Callum Clay. Michelle Anderson.
Present. Good afternoon.
Andrew Everard.
Yes, I'm here.
Thank you. Joe Slesser.
Hello, here.
Professor Ken Durans. He is on the call. I think I've seen him this afternoon. Steve Baragwanath.
Sorry, President Emily, I'm sorry, I was muted.
That's okay, thank you. Steve Baragwanath. Simon Pickett.
Present. Good afternoon, all.
Philip Dickinson.
Good afternoon.
Gavin Booth.
Yes, I'm here.
Chris Fitzpatrick.
Yeah, present. Hello, everyone.
Tristan Revel.
Hello. Hi there.
Thank you. Josh Greaves.
Good afternoon.
Andy Watts. Julia Merivale. And Peter Tomlinson. We should also have the following officers in attendance today. Myself, Emily Wilcox, Democratic Services Officer, Mark Popplewell, Strategic Finance Lead, Children's Services, Elizabeth Bowes, Strategic Finance Manager, Schools Finance Team, Martin Smith, Assistant Director for Children's Education, and Geraldine Wilders, Head of Service for School Strategy. Is there anybody that I've missed that is here? No, that's okay then, thank you.
Thanks very much, Emily. I'll let you crunch the numbers on that one, but I think there's enough of us for us to kind of continue. So we're on to item number 2. But before we do that, I just want to say thank you. I don't think she's actually here today, but thank you to Keena Adkins, who is stepping down from the forum because of a change of her role. So we want to thank her for her contributions and her time. And we'll move on to item 2, which declarations of members' interests. If you have any interest that you wish to declare, can you please type speak into the chat for me? And I'll call you in. Don't think we've got any issues with that. Thank you. So we'll move on to item 3, which is the minutes of the forum meeting held on the 29th of June. I'd like to propose the minutes as a correct record. Do I have a seconder?
I'm happy to second, Gavin.
Yeah, thank you very much. That was Alan, I think.
Yes, it was.
Yeah, thank you. It's therefore proposed and seconded that the minutes be approved. Thank you very much. Does anyone wish to abstain from that? Or alternatively vote against? Right, we'll accept those as a fair record of the last meeting. Right, on to the first paper then, which is item number 4, the National Funding Formula for Schools. So it's update for 24-25. And we just see Lizzie there just appear. So Lizzie Bowes, Strategic Finance Manager, is going to present the report for us. We're going to be asked to kind of note the contents of this report and kind of share any comments in terms of steps being taken around the National Funding Formula and its affordability. So I'll hand over to you, Lizzie. Nice to see you.
Thank you very much, Gavin. Good afternoon, everybody. Nice to see you all. So the National Funding Formula was implemented in 2018-19 to create consistency and fairness in schools funding. The government are now working towards all local authorities moving to a hard national funding formula, and just over 70% of schools are now mirroring the formula. Lincolnshire replicated the national funding formula since its introduction. However, you'll recall in the January meeting, we advised that due to an increase in free school meals, there was an affordability gap. We've seen an increase in funding at a national level over the last few years, and the total schools budget for 24-25 is £59.6 billion. Moving to the key headlines relating to each of the 4 blocks, taking the schools block first, the primary and secondary per pupil units of funding have remained fairly static when compared to nationally. The operational guide for 24-25 was published in July, and except for free school meals, all funding formula values will increase by 2.4%, subject to affordability. Per pupil funding will increase by at least 0.5% when compared to 23-24 baselines. Mainstream schools additional grant funding that was allocated as a separate grant in 22-23 has been incorporated into the formula. There's a new formulaic method to calculating split site funding. It is anticipated that Lincolnshire secondary schools who previously qualified for this funding will receive a reduction, and officers are currently modelling the financial impact of this. Appendix A provides a comparison of the funding formula factors from 23-24 to 24-25. The local authority intends to adopt the national funding formula in 24-25 due to the tight timescales in terms of when the final APT is published and the submission deadline. The local authority does not intend to hold a consultation with the sector for 24-25. Moving on to the Central School Services block, the ongoing responsibilities element of the funding has increased by about £165,000. The historical commitment funding is reducing by a further 20%, and this funding finances the long-standing PFI contract. Officers are in the process of seeking agreement from the policy team to have the contract value protected until the end of that contract. Turning next to the high needs block, the funding floor has been set at a lower rate of 3% compared to the previous couple of years, and this is because they front-loaded this funding in this funding settlement period. The reduced funding per head of 3% will put a significant pressure on the local authority in terms of financially managing the high needs block. We are currently forecasting to have an overspend in that block in 24-25. We've discussed before the national trend, which we are also seeing in Lincolnshire, of an increasing numbers of children with complex needs, which is having a material financial impact on the high needs block, and that'll be touched on more in later papers. Turning next to the early years block, the spring budget announcement announced additional funding into the early years sector, and there's an additional announcement in July regarding the early years supplementary grant, all of which will be passported on to the sector. The government have previously announced that working parents will be eligible for additional childcare during 2024, and the DfE recently consulted on a new funding framework that will be required for this new childcare support. In July, the government also announced additional funding to support schools with a Teachers' Pay Award by the Teachers' Pay Additional Grant, and for Lincolnshire this equates to £6.3 million. So in conclusion, the increase in funding in 24-25 is of course welcome. However, the high needs block will continue to require careful management. The local authority has received a draft APT and is undertaking financial modelling. The local authority concludes a consultation will not be required and plans to continue to adopt the national funding formula. The final version of the APT will be released in December, which is due for submission on 22nd of January before budget shares are published on the 29th of February. And as Gavin said at the start, the form is asked to note the content of the report and to comment on steps regarding affordability that are detailed in more detail in the report.
Okay, thank you, Lizzie. If you've got anything that you would like to ask or anything you'd like to raise, please can you indicate so in the chat, and then we'll invite you in. I'll just give you a second to do that. Joe, please, if you wouldn't mind turning your camera on and coming in.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Hi Elizabeth, I know we've had kind of email communication over the past couple of days on this paper. I obviously only received your email this morning, so I thought I'd come back to you within the meeting if that's okay. You quoted an average for SEND funding as around 18,000 with no kind of national benchmarking figure. The average is kind of quoted as around 25,000 per pupil for a complex needs school, and which is kind of significantly higher for Lincolnshire than with Lincolnshire. And there's been an article in the Schools Week in May regarding other schools that are funded significantly higher than Lincolnshire, who are looking at a deficit budget for this coming year, and wondered whether we are going to be doing anything to kind of to bring us up to a closer to the national average.
Thanks, Joe. I think what we have to consider is obviously the high needs block in its entirety, and about the fact that at the moment we are one of the local authorities that is managing to retain within that budget. We'll come on to that in some of the papers about actually the number of schools that also local authorities whose high needs blocks are in deficit, and therefore it's about that management, including considering, of course, the increase in the complexity of the children, the increase in the number of children with EHCPs and everything like that. So we're about to go through the budget setting process that will look kind of at where we need to be for some of those things. I don't know if Mark wants to say anything more. This thing's popped up.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think it's a fair challenge to put that to us. We do have quite a fundamental formula, so it's built up from cost base. But what we do appreciate is that particularly the pay awards on those non-teaching staff, it is a high proportion amongst that special school sector. So we are reviewing the funding formula for 24-25. We have been engaging with the sector in terms of asking for information by surveys in terms of where their cost pressures are, where they're seeing the highest increases. We did respond in 23-24 mid-year, providing some supplementary funding. Overall school balances across the sector appear satisfactory, although not in all cases, which is obviously a good benchmark to do. But yes, there is no national comparisons, and I think the SEND and AP framework, so via the Blue and the Green paper, they are looking to try and make more standardisation. I don't know the timing of that, but clearly that appears to be the direction of travel. But essentially what we want to do, we want to deliver fair funding to the sector, to them to be able to meet the needs. And I think the funding formula we have is robust and has the substance. We'll just need to make sure it keeps pace with the cost increases that schools are facing, which is essentially the review that we're taking place at the moment. So hopefully that provides some sort of assurance that we are keeping an eye on this.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Joe. Can we go to Alan Howe, please, next?
Oh, hello. Yes, a relatively simple question. In the paper, there's a mention of the change in the way that the rates are going to be billed. I just wondered what impact that would have overall, if any, on schools' budgets.
Thanks, Alan. So what should happen is it should make the process far more simple, far less bureaucratic. And what it should actually do is ensure that schools funding is a bit more timely. So at the moment, what is happening is that if there's a rates revaluation for a maintained school, then that increase we can't finance until the following financial year because of the regulations. So what should happen is that is all done on the portal, and then it's just dealt with between the ESFA and the billing authority. So if we can convince the billing authorities to go on to this new method, we think it'd be beneficial for everybody.
Okay, fine. Thank you. Makes sense.
Thanks, Alan. Tristan, please.
Hi there. I noticed there was a comment about 30% increase in costs of placements, SEND placements. But I wonder if there was any other comment about inflationary pressures elsewhere, which I think would help put into context the actual funding, the real value of the funding increases. Because I think, whilst it's welcome that they've got an increase there, everything I read about in the news about headline inflation rates sets me to thinking this will be a real a cut in funding to schools. So any comments on that would be very helpful.
I think there's three things to consider. I think, first of all, obviously the MSAG funding that schools received before that was to help with the pay awards and utilities, that is still now in there, so that hasn't gone. For our maintained schools, so the TPAG, the funding that's come for the pay award, we had already put in the budget for this year about a 5% increase. So we'd already kind of put in, advised more than I think a lot of local authorities have. So that TPAG funding that we have, that the schools have received, we don't think from the modelling be financially disadvantaged because they've already got most of the pay award already built into that. We have gone back to, so I've got to call the ESFA to kind of provide some rationale for the percentages that they've quoted. We've quoted in the report to say, how does that make up? What is that made up of? Because we don't have that information. So we are kind of trying to understand the rationale for those percentages that they've given to us. We're hoping that things like utilities, obviously this year we put some very, very high percentages in. I think what's transpiring is it isn't actually quite as high as what was actually we budgeted. So we're hoping that will come down a bit. But no, that there'll continue to be some cost pressures potentially in the system. But it's kind of, we have to kind of wait to sort of see, once your schools have put the budgets in, what they put the costs in, and kind of where we are. But we do know from the maintained sector that there's still a significant amount of carry forwards that are in the system. Not everybody, but there is still a healthy amount in there for a lot of our schools.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, everybody. I think that may be it. Lizzie, we've been asked to kind of propose that we've kind of considered your report and noted the contents. If anybody disagrees with that, let us know in the chat. But thank you very much, Lizzie, and we'll move on.
Thank you.
Happy. Thank you. Moving on to number 5 on the agenda, which is the de-delegation of maintained primary school budgets for 24-25, 25-26. So Mark Popwell is going to take us through this one. The recommendation is that maintained primary school reps on the forum agree to the proposals for de-delegation of reserves and agree to de-delegation of the budget for those periods that we've just outlined. So this really, in terms of making a decision and voting, kind of comes down to Alan Howard, Tony Stevens and Callum Clay in terms of being our maintained representatives. So particularly pertinent for you, but feel free everybody else to kind of chip in with questions and comments as after Mark's gone through the report. So over to you, Mark.
Yeah, thanks, Chair, and thanks for summarising that. So the government's decision to implement the national funding formula still allows the de-delegation arrangements for maintained schools to continue. So the page 29 just details some of those key features. So it is only primary and secondary mainstream schools that can have de-delegations, and of which they are maintained schools only. So academies are unaffected by this. The decision to de-delegate will be considered by sector level as well in terms of primary and secondary. Should there be any conversions to any schools to academies during the year, the sum of the de-delegation value for a service will change as a result, of which we'll need to respond to that. And any underspends that arise on budgets from maintained schools should be, as a point of principle, earmarked for the benefit of maintained schools in that sector only. So reflecting back in terms of the 22-23 performance, you'll see there on page 30 in terms of the de-delegation budgets that were in place. No funds were de-delegated for maintained secondary schools, so it was predominantly maintained primary schools. The overall underspend on this, the cumulative underspend reported at the March 23 was 1.4 million, and this included an underspend during the year of just over £500,000. So there's a number of reasons for this underspend. They related to the termination of employment costs to maintain primary schools, which where they're in financial difficulties, and it's about supporting the school to overcome that through staffing changes. So there was an underspend on that. And as Lizzie alluded to, in terms of maintained primary school balances, although they're fallen slightly at the end of the year, they do remain generally in a good financial position overall, which is reassuring. Other underspends relate to the interim head service, which has now been superseded with the locality lead support in terms of supporting leaders and improving partnership arrangements, and then also an underspend on school intervention support directly with schools. So reflecting also on what other commitments to go against those reserves, the School Advisor Support Fund of 260,000 has been previously been earmarked, and the Council wished to earmark a further sum of 138,000, rising to 398,000 to support additional one-off sector-led support by the locality leads. You'll also remember Maintain Primary School members of the forum previously agreed the launch of a 2-year programme to increase pupil fluency in reading by year 2. That is now underway, of which currently we have 151,000 remaining as earmarked to support that programme. And that programme was in the context of Lincolnshire children performing less well than the majority of their peers nationally. So it was about supporting that narrowing of the gap. So the focus of the service is on intervening early and supporting schools in driving school improvement activity. Lincolnshire is now midway in that league table of our statistical neighbours, which is an important step up. So the Council proposed to continue supporting this journey of improvement in terms of the education standards for the primary maintained schools, and has identified £500,000 from that underspend to facilitate this. Following analysis of patterns of impact and interventions, the Council are in the process of developing plans and how they can support the leaders improve performance, particularly around that those lower attainments and disadvantaged children. And they're looking at having a plan over a 5-year period to support schools in that and to create some form of legacy thereafter. So then we've got the remaining delegation reserves balance of 347,000. And page 31 and page 32 detail some of the reasons why that needs to take place. But essentially, there are a number of reasons why that is the case. There could be the transfers from maintained schools to academy status, therefore reducing the budget in year. There is obviously the demand-led nature in terms of schools potentially going into financial difficulties and how we can then support them in a responsive and rapid way. So there are a number of reasons why that is so. But although at the moment school core funding has increased, as previously alluded to, there is also noting that there is increasing costs in delivering education, particularly around pay. So clearly school budgets still remain under a sort of a challenging position, and therefore we do need to be careful in terms of supporting schools with financial challenges. So then I move on to the current financial year in 23-24 on page 32, and that details the current delegation arrangements. And you'll see there the section in terms of what it finances, so it termination of employment costs, primary maintained locality lead support and intervention, additional locality lead, which was a prior agreement, and the ethnic minority travel education team. And just by way of a reminder, the council responded to the DFE's ending of the local authority school improvement grant, which was supporting maintained school activities. Obviously by reviewing those dedelegations and repurposing those, the interim head service ceased, and then we was then able to support that, use that funding for the locality lead support to maintain that overall school improvement delivery and service to the sector. So then moving on to the 24-25 proposals. The council proposes to continue operating that hybrid model with capacity provided by the central team for the universal maintained primary schools, supporting those schools in financial difficulties, whether that's through the staffing reduction panel and financial support through that, or through direct support by the intervention fund. And that was the key thing. It's about ensuring that improved outcomes can be secured, and in the event of potentially any Ofsted inspections. So it is proposed that the current contingency rate of £29.23 per pupil continue for 24-25, and it will support that hybrid model. And you can see at the bottom of page 33 how that is outlined. The MTET service, that is made up of staffing and requires a fixed budget. Therefore, depending on the pupil numbers of the October census, that rate will change accordingly, but we're aiming for that target budget of 187,000. We also, and this is obviously what we're seeking a decision on today in terms of the 24-25 position. In terms of the 25-26, we previously come to the forum members of the maintained sector asking for an agreement in principle relating to the continuation of that to enable us to plan for more than the medium term. But clearly, we do need to seek annual agreement from the sector to enable us to proceed. So in terms of the conclusion, the outcomes from the decision made by maintained primary representatives to the Schools Forum will be reflected in the maintained primary schools future budgets from 24-25, and essentially that will remain in place for next year, and then obviously we'll be coming back again this time next year for the 25-26. But today, obviously, seeking something in principle on that year. I think that is everything, Chair. So seeking a decision in terms of the support in the utilisation of the reserves, and also for the 24-25 delegation budgets, and an agreement in principle for 25-26. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Straight to Tony, please, with a question. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. Mark, this might not be your question to answer. It may well be pointed back to Martin, but the question that I would like to ask is one of the biggest part is the primary maintained locality lead support and intervention funding, and how is that being measured in level of impact to ensure we're getting the bang for our buck, if you like?
Do you want me to pick that up, Mark? Happy to.
Yes, if you could, Martin. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. So, afternoon, Tony. Hope you're well. Good to see you. Thank you very much for your question. I think it's worthwhile noting that over the years, our intervention funding and the impact that that's been able to have on some of our schools has meant that rapid improvement could take place in a school where otherwise it wouldn't be able to be taken forward quickly due to the financial constraints of the school. So there've been a number of schools where we've been able to put a package of support in and fund that so that the school could improve, and that's led to a number of schools being able to avoid going below good, or it's meant a number of schools have been able to get back on track and become good. Without the flexibility of that intervention funding and the universal offer to our maintained schools, schools would really be left on their own and defenceless in terms of being able to support them. So I would, say to the Schools Forum, and I'd invite Geraldine as well to maybe make comment as Geraldine screens a good number of these intervention fund requests to make sure that that money's got a purpose, targeted criteria of output, what do we expect to see for it. And I have to say it's amazing on some of the bids that range from £5,000 to £20,000, that can truly transform the school improvement journey of a school that's in financial difficulty. And so it represents good value for money as well. So Geraldine, I don't know if you want to make any comment on the impact further with some of our intervention schools without necessarily naming the schools on the call.
No, I think you've summarised that well. Thank you, Martin. I think just to reiterate the need for it and the risk of that intervention fund not being there for some schools in financial difficulty. The locality leads in particular monitor the outcomes of any intervention very closely and evaluate the impact of how that money has been spent. The only other thing I was going to add, Martin, was the change in the locality lead role in a number of ways. The first one being where a school has previously been ranked as good and not at risk of a less than good inspection. In previous years, that school had little contact with a locality lead, but we identified that there was a risk around that. and increasing the team has enabled us to ensure that every maintained school has a minimum of 3 core visits every year, at which you as Chair of Governors will have been invited. And that's made sure that we can have that ongoing contact, monitoring well-being of leaders, supporting governors, supporting leaders, signposting, and also where there may be an area of risk or an identified dip, shall we say, in standards and outcomes for those pupils in that school, we're able to escalate much more quickly rather than relying on data at the end of the year and or Ofsted outcomes. So the impact of the team has been significant, and I think it's in the report about the number of schools that have had and the increase in number of schools that have got a good outcome in their most recent inspection. Don't know if there's anything else to add, Martin?
No, I don't think so. I'm just come back to Tony in case Tony's got a further question or comment.
No, I haven't. I just wanted it. Sometimes it's very easy just to have a figure in a report like this, but actually understanding what the level of impact and how much impact that is making is something that we just need to tease out a little bit more. So that's great, and thank you both very much.
You're welcome.
Thanks for the question, Tony. Alan, do you want to come in there?
Yes, Gavin, thank you. It's just a quick one, really, Tony. I'm a governor at 2 schools that have benefited from the intervention and the locality lead. One school in particular, we've seen quite an impact in their outcomes at the end of year 6. So I can definitely say there is an impact and it does work.
Can I just dip in again there? Sorry, because Alan actually has just reminded me about the importance of locality lead support in head teacher recruitment.
Yes.
And if we consider the number of head teacher recruitments that we've undertaken over the last academic year, that workload has been significant and it really is valuable, I think, Alan, I'm sure you'd agree.
Yes, I agree. Yes, you were there.
Yeah, very valuable in terms of that support for governors.
Absolutely.
To make sure it's a robust process.
Too true.
Thank you. Tristan, do you want to come in and probably pass the same comment around that statement that you've highlighted that I also might say as an academy head?
Yes, I just thought it allied very closely to the discussion that was being held actually about the impact of the work, and it was highlighted in the report, and so I've just snipped it for you there. It's on page 30, but it doesn't come with any figures. But I just thought, if that's what's happening, then surely that's something worth really celebrating. But I'm interested in what the numbers are. If it's just a small increase, whether it's huge, because we do hear consistently that academisation is the way to improve schools, and maybe what you've got here is some data that goes the other way. I don't know.
Martin?
I'll chip in on that one. Thank you, Tristan. I think really insightful question, and I think I would always say we have to treat how data's cut and interpreted with some caution and trepidation, because of course statistics can be pulled in different ways. However, what it does show is that some of our interventions and some of our work we can clearly map through and show that there's a level of improvement that has a strategic impact on the county. And obviously Lincolnshire is an education investment area. I think for me, taking your comments around the numbers, we'll feed that back and we'll reflect on that, maybe how we can bring that more rounded view of impact with numbers of pupils through to the schools forum. It will go through to our children and young people scrutiny board, so we can always share that report in due course. I think for me, what I would suggest from a schools forum perspective is that there are lots of schools that are requiring support for different reasons, and in the landscape currently it's about identifying which is the best thing for us to do as a system, as a partnership, to be able to move it further forward. So although that data set talks about maintained schools have improved, as the AD for education, I'd be interested around how we improve that across the system and how we harness that collective responsibility on it. But we'll follow that up with some more figures to illuminate it a little bit more for you, Tristan.
That's great. Thank you.
And it won't surprise you as the Chief Exec of an Academy Trust that I'll also say that the home for the most vulnerable schools and schools that are in the greatest difficulty always ends up with an Academy Trust. So there is a proportion of those schools that find themselves in a really sticky place that end up potentially skewing the data a little bit for those trusts. But I think it's always an interesting one when we start crunching the data. But absolutely agree with the sentiment that if it's working somewhere, we need to be sharing it so it's working everywhere, to make sure that we can do that. Mark, you've had your hand up for a while, so we'll come back to you.
Yeah, it's just, I guess, in response to what people commented, I think it's just useful sort of reflecting on the changing landscape in terms of the dedelegations. So it was predominantly for those schools in financial difficulties. And I think it is important to have that, because no school wants to be in that position, and basically through financial support, through staffing reductions and a contribution, or indeed intervention support, enables that school to recover much quicker than what it would normally. But also with the changing landscape, and we've been able to use that, manufacture some of that monies to then support the sector, to maintain primary sector as a whole in terms of those locality leads and utilising resources where we thought actually could be better deployed. And essentially that's what we've done with this solution and the locality leads, albeit it did force our hand with the reduction in grant funding. So I think it's a good blended approach in terms of supporting that sector, those that are potentially very vulnerable, but also raising standards as well. That's it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. And just a comment in the chat there from Michelle Anderson from Spalding High, just saying, how impactful the visits from the locality lead have been recently to her as a secondary maintained school, and how the kind of focus of those meetings have got tighter and tighter over recent years. So that's really positive feedback. So thank you for that. Right, Martin, are you coming back in?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. I think I just want to also say that obviously for the purposes of Schools Forum, the paper highlights the funding mechanism in which sustains that primary locality lead kind of team. But I do just want to highlight as well the fact that enables us to have that team of people with the relevant skills and expertise is also a benefit to the broader sector. So although they don't necessarily do direct work with all academies, there is a point of contact, a route into the local authority and the broader sector-led partnership that this funding enables. So it funds the direct work with those schools, but the knock-on benefit of the fact that you've got that capacity then to support the infrastructure in a locality, which I think is the bit that Steve and Michelle are kind of hinting at. There's additional consequences as a result of this decision. So I just wanted to make that clear of a broader benefit of that funding.
Fantastic. And I think great evidence of the kind of one Lincolnshire approach kind of thing, regardless of designation of schools. So again, like we said, this is a kind of maintained primary school representatives decision. They're being asked to agree the proposals for the use of the dedelegation of reserves, agree the dedelegation budget for the 24-25 period, and then agree in principle the one set out for 25-26. So can we just have a vote on that, please? I think, as far as I understand, it's Alan, Tony and Callum. Can we see whether you are in agreement, please?
I'm for, Chairman.
Thank you, Alan.
That's Tony, fully supported.
Thanks, Tony.
Yeah, Callum, fully support.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you very much. And we will, so I would assume then that has been carried. And then we will move on to item number 6, which is the revised school budget for 23-24. Back to Mark again for this. So again, we're asked to consider this, note the report, and support the local authorities' use of uncommitted sum that's at the end of the report there. So over to you, Mark. Either sitting very, very still, or he has frozen. Are you there, Mark? Oh, this could be you, Martin, instead. How are you fixed for this one?
I'm assuming we may have lost Mark for a second, so I would suggest we just give it a couple of minutes to see if he can rejoin.
Yep.
I've just removed him, so hopefully he'll realise that we can't see him and come back in.
Or he may be halfway through talking. Oh, here he is. He's back. Sorry to cut you off in your prime, Mark, but you were frozen, so we thought we'd kick you out and invite you back.
Thanks, Chair.
Over to you.
Thank you very much. So, yes, this is a paper on the revised schools budgets for 23-24. So, as a way of background, the dedicated schools grant is a ring-fence grant, can only be spent in accordance with the DFEs school and early years regulations, finance regulations. So each year, a revision of the school budget is required to reflect the under and overspend arising from the DSG in the previous financial year. Under the DfE regulations, underspends are automatically carried forward to the following financial year, and the local authority must consult with the schools forum over its plans in terms of the utilisation of those underspends or addressing any overspends. So moving on to page 42, this section provides a bit of context really in terms of local authorities overspending, because I think it's really important, particularly in light of what we're seeing nationally. In terms of local authorities overspending, they're obviously required to take them forward to the next year or future years, and they are subject to DfE oversight to ensure any overspends are recovered. There is also a statutory override in place from DULUC, and that goes from 2020 to 2026, where any DSG deficits as an overall need to be held in a separate reserve within the LA accounts. This obviously does cause concern for Section 151 officers and external auditors about the sustainability of that and having plans in place to actually recover those deficits. In terms of the ESFA support, they are running 3 programs offering direct support and effectiveness to the high needs system. The 3 areas are the safety valve intervention program, the delivering better value in SEND program, and then just general SEND support. And the 3 aims of that is to secure a sustainable management of the local authority's high needs block. I'm just going to talk through in terms of each of those and again that national context. So the safety valve, that does target those largest deficits within the DSG, and the contributing factor is the high needs block. And the programme, what they aim to do is to deliver a sustainable plan, but it has to be rapid. It has to be in a rapid period to ensure that's sustainable footing. With that the primary goal being about demand management and about appropriate and cost-effective provision. And then under these plans, they obviously have to deliver a number of actions to ensure that they're sustainable, but also stopping the deficit growing. So the awards, 20 local authorities received this in 22-23, worth 585 million over that period, which is typically 5 years. So quite a significant cost to the ESFA in terms of supporting those. But it also means that the local authorities have to do that rapid change and also provide financial support themselves, as we've seen from other local authorities. So the delivering better value in SEND programme, that targets the less severe but still substantial growing overspends. And in this latest year, 85 million has been put forward to 55 local authorities to support that their recovery in terms of their deficits. What is that national context? And I think that the scale of the overspends overall is phenomenal. So there appears to be a continuing increase in number of local authorities overspending, and it's been estimated around 2/3 of local authorities in the country, with an estimated deficit of 2.3 billion. So clearly quite a colossal overspend that needs to be recovered by those local authorities. The SEND Green Paper did acknowledge the unsustainable SEND system, and their arm of delivery was through the SEND and AP improvement plan, with a mechanism for implementing that change. But clearly it is going to be a challenging period for many. So local authorities such as Lincolnshire must ensure we continue to carefully manage the DSG to avoid our DSG overspending. In terms of Lincolnshire's financial position, so we have a cumulative underspend at the 31st of March 23 of 13.8 million, 4.3 of which is relates to existing commitments, which can be found in the appendices, Appendix B, and then the uncommitted sum of 9.4 million is our uncommitted sum, which represents a 1.3% of DSG for Lincolnshire. Within that overall sum, that does include the 3.2 million underspend that we incurred in 22-23 across our blocks. I think, and that is detailed in Appendix A by block. But one thing is just to note in terms of the key pressures, which is going to be focused on those high needs. So we are seeing an increasing cost in mainstream EHC in terms of those demands, and also the external placement. So where we haven't got provision locally, whether that's within mainstream or special schools, we're having to go out to the market. We're seeing that number increase in terms of numbers going through that system, but also the quantum as well, also increasing because of the unfavourable market conditions. But they were offset by temporary underspends in AP places, alternative provision places, and services funded from other budgets, and also an increase in allocation that the government announced in the autumn statement of 21. So we have reviewed our existing commitments, and so they total 4.3 million, and they can be seen in Appendix B. In terms of the proposed use of the uncommitted sum of 9.4 million, the local authority proposed that the remaining sum is not committed and held in reserves due to the current spending levels within the SEND area and the uncertainty of the financial environment going forward. The following pages, 43 and 44, pick up the reasons for that, and I'll pick out sort of snippets in terms of the key things. As I've previously said, estimated 2/3 of local authorities with DSG deficits valued at over 2.3 billion. Moving on to page 44, the much lower funding increase that we're seeing in 24-25, so we're only seeing a 3% increase, where in the past we've seen a much greater increase, and Lizzie referred to that in terms of the front loading of the DSG settlement over this period. Medium-term financial planning within the council is indicating an in-year overspend for 24-25 in light of these demands and price changes, and therefore we would need this available reserve to provide a balanced budget, which is what we need to secure. So a higher cost base includes increased demand in prices in alternative provision, an increased number of EHC plans being issued, mainstream schools unable to meet needs of children, and therefore we're needing to place more within the special school sector. But clearly there's only a quantum capacity that we have within the sector, therefore that's leading to external placements taking place. And as page 44 outlines, a 14% increase in SEND placements, external placements in the last 16 months. And we're seeing, due to those unfavourable market conditions, a 30% increase in costs as well. And that's not just been seen in the SEND area, we're also seeing it in children care in terms of our council funded budgets. So with the nature of the services that High Needs Block provides, which is driven by sort of large and demand-led budgets, it is difficult to change spending levels quickly. Therefore, having a sufficient level of reserves to draw on and provide the LA with the time to deliver the changes is really important. The annual SEND report in the June meeting did illustrate the impact that we were making through the SEND partnership. An increase in EHC plans by 6.5%, which was lower than the national average. Nevertheless, financial challenges do remain, and difficult decisions will be required to ensure Lincolnshire avoids overspending its DSG in its entirety. Moving on to page 45. So the 23-24 financial position is currently showing to be broadly on target based on current data and assumptions, but clearly we are monitoring that position in the current year. Lincolnshire will be continued to be funded on that funding floor as well. So we are only funded on that 3% level. We are in receipt of protection funding in terms of our overall high needs block. We need to be mindful of the future changes on the SEND systems. But it's hoped that the government will provide some form of protection arrangements to avoid any cliff edges if they did radically change the system. So Lincolnshire's desire is still to achieve a balanced, sustainable budget, ensuring funding is directed to the right activities and fair funding is delivered to the sector, and indeed it to be cost effective. We don't want to be in a position whereby we have to retract some of that comprehensive early help support services that we provide to schools, or indeed to actually seek a transfer from the schools block up to 0.5%, which I know a number of local authorities have gone through that route. So we obviously want to protect schools delegated funding, but clearly the reserves is one-off in nature, and we will be trying to manage this over the medium term. But we may well end up coming back to the position of seeking a 0.5% school block transfer if what we put in place isn't able to secure a sustainable budget. But at this stage, we want to use the reserves, provide ourselves time to respond to these challenges, working with the sector to ensure that we can provide a sustainable budget going forward. So in summary, Lincolnshire is in a good financial position, particularly compared to our statistical neighbours, but also other local authorities across the country, by having a surplus DSG budget. However, we do need to have careful and prudent management required in light of the increasing demand and cost rises and the tighter financial settlement going forward. And the available reserves is required to support the LA in terms of providing that sustainable budget, for at least the short and medium term, allowing us time to respond to the challenges that we're seeing. I think that is everything. So it's seeking your support in terms of the use of the uncommitted sum to support particularly the high needs block over the short and medium term. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark. Before we go to questions, I think Martin wants to come in there just to add something. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mark. So thank you, Mark, for sharing that paper and highlighting some of the demands of what's coming through. I just want to kind of stress to the Schools Forum that the high needs element of all of this is one budget that has to serve a multitude of purposes. And the key for that in Lincolnshire is making sure that we really do embed and promote our inclusive ambition for Lincolnshire, where children are respected, hopeful and optimistic about their futures. And the reason why I bring that back forward is outside of this paper, many of you will have heard me speak about the different work streams that we've been developing. So the biggest one is the £100 million investment in our special school estate to improve the facilities and the lived experiences of children and young people, but also to create those additional spaces. So 500 plus spaces have been and will be created as that programme comes through. So we've created additional spaces, but the demand is likely to outstrip those places and again bring us back towards the dependence on external placements. And you note in the paper the average cost of an external placement. We've also worked really hard as a SEND partnership to communicate and promote the understanding of the SEND system and the high needs challenges within our partners and within our schools, which many of you on this call will have heard me speak about at length. But over the last 2.5 years, we have embedded and strengthened our local offer and the importance of the graduated approach. We've introduced the SEND advice line. We've commissioned a workforce development programme to support our professionals to be as resilient and ready for that demand as it's being presented. We've revisited and redefined our decision-making processes. So 6-week, 16-week panels are made up of a multi-agency, multidisciplinary team to make sure that the best decisions are made. We've increased practice standards and been clear around that. We've introduced strength-based annual reviews to actually celebrate the successes of our children who've benefited from that high-quality support. We've had successful transition, so not just about creating the places for special schools, but we've had successful transitions of children who've had an excellent experience in their special education, but been able to reintegrate back into the mainstream. And some of our schools have been outstanding at supporting that transition so that those children get that full breadth and benefit of a curriculum and a qualification. And this system is governed really carefully. So monthly and bi-monthly, we have a core group that really scrutinises with myself, Mark, Head of SEND and partners, our Lincolnshire Parent Carer Forum, scrutinise the patterns and data trends. So we're really well briefed on what's coming through. However, a challenge remains and the demand will still remain on the system, whether that's in terms of capacity or whether that's financial. And I just wanted to mention to Schools Forum the proactive nature that we've been taking with the support of our SEND partnership, which is school leaders. But difficult decisions are going to need to be made at some point, and it's going to be a difficult decision because meeting the needs and the demands on the service and the system, as well as maintaining that early intervention and support, is going to be a challenging conversation, because we know, and we've got the evidence to suggest, that early intervention really does pay dividends and supports children to be able to get better outcomes and independence for learning. However, unless we manage the demand and the ability to meet need, you know, the financial pressures are on the horizon. I know Mark says we're in a good financial position, but I think you've got to paint that in the context of it's not significant reserves in the grand scheme of things. And as Mark mentioned, this year's uplift in the high needs block's 3%. That isn't a massive uplift when our costs for placements are increasing. I also just want to mention as well the SEND National and AP plan. That is beginning to gather some support, and as a region we do have a regional expert group who are going to be working on some of these work streams. They're going to be looking at national standards for mainstream schools of what should typically be available across our schools and settings, but also what should be typically available from the services to support that, whether that's local authority or health. They're also going to be looking at the 3-tiered outreach model in terms of AP and looking at how to better support behaviour. Some of that we already deliver through a different construct, but it's waiting to be articulated with more clarity. And also there is a growing demand on managing expectations of what can be delivered. So I just wanted to flag that up, is that there's a lot of focus. It's likely that the National SEND and AP plan will take 2 to 3 years to go through the process and identify what that national model of works is. But I just wanted to share with the Schools Forum that we're not just focusing on the budget. It's not about the budget in itself. The budget's the output of the system. But what we're trying to do, and really to get Schools Forum to back that motivation and that desire to try and make the system work better, and make sure that we keep everybody in a strength-based conversation when it comes to SEND. It shouldn't be a battle. It shouldn't be a frustrating conversation. It's a wicked issue that collectively the system needs to come together to work upon. So I just wanted to say that, just to kind of highlight and share some of our work and thinking. Thank you very much, Chair. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you, Martin. Joe Slessor, please.
Hello, and thank you for that, and absolutely commend everything that LCC is doing to improve the services available in SEND. I suppose my question kind of goes back to my question earlier, really, is that kind of if the per pupil budgets within the special sector were increase slightly or more in line with national, would that give the schools a better capacity to react rather than having everything sat within a central budget that has to be reacted at that point? Do you know what I'm getting? Do you see where I'm going with this in terms of kind of the ability to have that little bit of floating fund witin a special school so that they are able to react as a whole where the specialism is and where the expertise lies, rather than kind of financially the additional financial kind of demands in coming back to the LA for support? Just wondered whether that's been considered in any of this, because absolutely I think the services that are available are fantastic. I'm just wondering whether the balance could be altered slightly.
Yeah, so I understand your point, Joe, and I think it's something that we, through our SEND partnership, are often reflecting on around where do we give and take. I think it goes back to the kind of the headroom within the budget. When we make a singular decision around a pay rate, etc., we could easily swamp that reserve, if you like. So 1% on X can significantly wipe out the reserve. What we do keep alive is, what are the other options available to us to support schools? Do we need to revisit our assumptions in the formula around staffing structures to support children in specialist settings? Do we need to revisit the targeted hourly top-up rate? All of them come with a cost, and when we're working in such a scaled system, 1% can easily, on anything, 1% can easily spend £1 million. And actually, I think what you're saying is, if there was the wherewithal to increase something by 3%, we wouldn't disagree with that. It's just the overall envelope of the funding means we can't afford to do all of those things at one time. And I think on the caution of national's a bit of a red herring, because in some local authorities where they're funding much more highly than Lincolnshire, you may find that they're in a significant deficit on their high needs block. And so over the next 2 to 3 years, with the safety valve programme or the delivering better value programme, you'll probably see that funding having to be reduced somewhat to make the high needs block balance, if that makes sense. But I take on board your point, and certainly it's something I'll bring to the fore again in our SEND partnership to go, you know, you're on the SEND partnership, what are your views and thoughts? What are the other ideas? We had a SEND partnership meeting yesterday and covered a number of those topics as well, which we're developing. So take on board what you say. I don't know if Mark wants to comment any further on my response to you, Joe, or you want to come back.
From my perspective, Martin, I think it's a fair challenge, Joe, and that is something we have been reflecting on. We have reflected on for a number of years in terms of sort of striking that balance. As the report said, it's we still want to deliver fair funding for specialist schools, whether that's additional top-up funding for mainstream schools and supporting within that sector, or indeed the specialist sector. We would rather spend the monies within our own schools than going out to the external market, that is for sure. And particularly we get greater value for money from yourselves as the state schools compared to that of the external market. But yeah, they're the sort of things that we are discussing, debating, and hence as a previous remark about surveys with the schools to try and understand some of those costs a bit better. Some of those, what are those challenges? And I think in the specialist sector, that non-teaching is a particular area where we need to be focusing on. So yes, please be reassured that we are looking at that. But clearly, we also need to have a look at it in terms of the context of the overall DSG and some of that modelling work, where I've alluded to a potential overspend in 24-25, that's excluding this work. So potentially it could go a little bit more. But again, we need to be reflective of the bigger picture in this. So we can certainly provide updates in the January forum in terms of where we are and where we've sort of positioned ourselves in terms of overall funding and how that's been devolved.
Thank you both.
Thanks for the question, Joe. I can't see anybody else in the chat, so we've been asked to note the contents of the report and support the LA's proposed use of the uncommitted sum, as Mark's outlined. I propose that we support the recommendation. If you would like to disagree, can you add that into the chat?
I would like to support the local authorities and the spending proposal.
Yeah,
I think it's a very good one. I thank Mark for his report, and I think with the uncertainties that we live in, that is a very, very good idea. That we propose to. I propose that we support the local authorities' proposal.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Drans. So in the absence of anybody going against, then we will support that recommendation. Thank you all very much. To move on to item number 7 now, which is just to make you aware of the Schools Forum work programme. I don't know if anybody wants to make any comments on that, but just to draw your attention to the next meeting, where there'll be papers on the schools funding arrangements, early years national funding formula. We'll have our academy and trust update, AP arrangements, and the second part of the kind of annual report on special educational needs, which is a kind of follow up to the previous paper that Sheridan brought to us, and we'll look at the schools programme again. If everyone's happy, I propose that we've noted the work programme. We know what's coming up. It's going to be a busy one in January. And that kind of concludes today's business. Thank you all very much for attending the meeting, and I wish you well with the rest of the term. Thank you all very much for your time.